Hello and welcome to the coaching workshop for the 3-minute thesis competition. If you're seeing this video, that means that you have been enlisted by the graduate school or by Collab to coach the 3-minute thesis competitors for their upcoming competition. I'm going to introduce myself, but before we get there, I want to first explain a little bit about what this competition is, if you aren't familiar, and why your role is so important. So let's start with a bit of introduction very briefly. So the 3-minute thesis competition started at the University of Queensland, probably, I'm not exactly sure, maybe a decade or two ago, and it has been spreading internationally ever since. The competition is meant to provide an opportunity for graduate students to come and talk about their research, explain what they're about to study, what they have studied, what they've already completed. You can compete at any point in your trajectory in your project. And of course, the goal is to share everything in 3 minutes. You get one slide. You cannot animate the slide. It's basically just a static image. The only rule for the presentation is that you can't go over 3 minutes. I believe if you go over 3 minutes, then you're automatically disqualified. So obviously you want to work to shorten their presentation if they are over 3 minutes. Don't worry, we're going to get to all of that. There's plenty to discuss here. But the reason why it matters, why this competition is so outstanding is, I have a PhD myself. I went through the process of getting that training. And when you get a PhD in science, you basically go from being a layperson to a hyper-specific expert in a very precise area. As you progress through that training, you learn how to act like a researcher in this field. And that comes with learning a lot of jargon, learning how to present your findings with a great deal of nuance. Rigorous, careful science should be presented carefully. However, there's no kind of back training. What I mean by that is as you go in a PhD or master's program from being a layperson in a subject to an expert in the subject and learning to speak that way, there's no training that kind of brings you back to your roots and teaches you how to connect with a non-specialist audience. You get really good at talking to people who are in the lab next door and really bad at talking to people who are in the house next door. It's really important to have training opportunities for graduate students, and that's exactly what the 3-minute thesis provides. It gives them a incredibly valuable toolkit to explain their research in a very concise amount of time and basically be as clear and accurate as possible. So it's kind of providing that back training. And so it's really, really important for students to participate in this. I'm a huge proponent of having, graduate level education on communications. In fact, I launched a class at Stanford myself called How to Communicate Science, where I teach students, PhD students, how to communicate with the public. So I cannot emphasize enough the importance of this competition. It's arguably one of the most valuable learning opportunities that PhD students will have, maybe the most valuable outside of the lab. Now, your role as a coach is equally important, right? So the reason why your role matters so much is because the amount of learning that they get out of this experience is largely dependent upon the feedback that you give them, because they will basically, before they meet you, they will have a preliminary competition where they will kind of put something together themselves. It might be good. It might not be very good. When I competed in 2021 or 2020, it was not very good. My preliminary competition was awful. I met with an incredible coach who totally showed me every problem, every mistake I was making, and helped me put together a much better proposal that ended up winning the competition that year. And so in order for students to get something out of this, they need a teacher, right? They need someone who is going to help them connect back to their former self, that layperson, and show them this is how you get that person to understand. That's what your role is. Your role is not to be an expert in their field. In fact, it's better if you're not an expert, because you are really just there to stop them if they start saying something that is not, you cannot follow, and to say, pause. What do you mean there? Can you please elaborate there? Or, hey, this part was a little hard to follow. Your role is to basically be like their grandma or their roommate, right? Just that the average person from the street who can tell them, I didn't understand you right there, or that visual aid isn't so good, to help them craft and improve that. So you are that feedback mechanism that allows them to benefit from this training experience. Your role also matters because the feedback you give them will determine how well they do in the competition. No pressure on you, but basically this is a competition. There are cash prizes, there's prestige associated with winning, and everyone's going to want to win. And your role is to basically help them achieve that. To get the best possible presentation put together that they can. So we're going to go into how you can help them gain the most benefit and put together the best possible presentation. And I'm going to show you that later. But first, I want to just quickly introduce myself. So my name is Ben Rein. I'm a neuroscientist by training. I did my PhD here at SUNY Buffalo. In 2021, I graduated. My PhD is in neuroscience, but I was working in the Department of Physiology and Biophysics. I went on after my PhD to a postdoc at Stanford University, and I was very certain that I wanted to be a professor. But I actually had a very transformative moment in the 3-minute thesis. It was at the end of my PhD, and I won, and I was empowered by that. I felt like I could, for once now, communicate my research to the public, and that I could actually, get my friends and family to understand what I was working on. And that actually was the start of what eventually transformed my career, because I've now, I say I'm a neuroscientist by training. I've turned into a science communicator. So shortly after the 3-minute thesis competition, I started posting videos on social media. There's a 3-minute thesis, and through social media, I've generated an audience of 1.2 million followers or so at this point. It's all about neuroscience and education, and it's basically like, every video of mine is short form. They're 1 to 2 minutes, and it's basically like me putting together the 3-minute thesis pitch over and over again. That my videos are just short summaries of research papers that come out, or descriptions of things happening in the field, or what you should know about your brain. Anyhow, this has really transformed my career. Like I said, I teach science communication at Stanford. I do a variety of other science communication work. I just published a book in 2025. I do a lot of consulting and advising for companies. And I'm also a coach for multiple universities and consultants for the 3-minute thesis competition. I do some workshops. This is an area where I specialize, right? Because I've built this entire career off of making short form videos on social media. And now I'm trying to use my experience to help students craft short form versions of their research. Let's get to part 2, which is the slide.